There you go.
Well, welcome everyone to this interview hosted by Royal Lane Baptist Church in Dallas, Texas. My name is Gregg. I am the pastor of Royal Lane, and it is my hope that as a Christian, as a pastor, as a person of faith, and as a faith leader who cares about the well-being of all people, that this interview will inform and inspire us to keep hope front and center and to assist those in need. I'm with Marv Knox, the field director of Fellowship Southwest. Marv and Joanna are good friends of the family, and Marv has his fingers on the pulse of how Christians and their churches it can be a positive presence at the border. Royal Lane Baptist Church supports Fellowship Southwest, and Royal Lane collected a missions offering this Christmas Eve to help facilitate the building of a place in Brownsville for refugees. So Royal Lane is invested in caring for those on the border, and I look forward to this conversation, Marv, today, because we'll be able to update our church, Royal Lane, on this work, and also tell others some things that are happening at the border during this time. So Marv, thank you for being here.
My pleasure. It's great to be with you, Michael.
So just personally, how are you weathering these strange days?
Yeah, thanks. Well, they are strange, aren't they? I already worked from home, so in one level, I was kind of used to sitting out here on our patio and passing the day, and I still do that. On the other hand, it just feels a little different when you really aren't supposed to go anywhere, and family can't come in. So Joanna and I are doing really pretty well. We feel very blessed. We've both been healthy, and we've been able to keep up with our daughters and our grandchildren thanks to FaceTime mostly. We've got one daughter in Buda, just south of Austin, and she has two little boys, and another daughter that lives in Durham, North Carolina. And we had to miss the third birthday party out there this spring because of the travel restrictions, but we see those grandkids every day, just about on our computer screens or phones, and so we feel blessed and kind of interested in how this is going to change our world and how maybe we can grow through this thing.
Good. Well, it seems like the whole world is affected by this, and I'm interested in knowing what's going on at the border to help people, and also how is Fellowship Southwest involved in this work?
Yeah, thanks for asking. So as you know, Fellowship Southwest has been on the border for quite a while, really for almost going on 2 years. When the caravan started coming in 2018, right off the bat, and they were separating families and detaining children, we began with a prayer vigil down there in Brownsville, and then through a network of pastors along the border, we've had the privilege of coming alongside congregations that are ministering to the refugees who they found just literally on their doorstep. And so at the very beginning of all of this, we were working with churches who had immigrants living in their facilities because they were allowed to cross the border and had no place else to go as they awaited the asylum process, and the numbers mounted. And then you're probably aware that about a year and a half ago, the rules changed, and the U.S. government began what's called the migrant protection protocols, and saying that the asylum seekers had to go back on the Mexican side of the border down there. And so through these congregations, we've developed, I guess, 6 or 7 points of ministry up and down the border. And as you can see on this map here, they literally are the entire length of the border from Brownsville, Matamoros, all the way to San Diego, Tijuana. And every one of them has to do with congregations and pastors ministering, and we found ways to come alongside them. These asylum seekers have come to the border because it's just really not been safe for them to remain in their homes. And so they found themselves trying to cross over. This picture is at the bridge at Matamoros, Brownsville, but this scene has been repeated up and down the entire length of the border. These folks have come because of persecution, either political or religious persecution in their homelands, or orchestrated violence. Sometimes people talk about, they say that people are fleeing gangs. And I think U.S. Residents have a hard time getting our minds around what that means, because for us, maybe gangs, we might think of a bunch of teenagers hanging out, but this is really organized crime, and a lot of people have been specifically targeted, either because of their faith or their livelihood, or they're just different, or the gangs are just trying to build up more and more people, and they target young people, particularly teenage boys. And so they've had to get away to keep their families safe. Also, the economy in that region, particularly in Central America, has really collapsed, and many people are no longer able to provide for their families. I say Central America, that's the place where most of the refugees have come, but they've also come from South America and from the Caribbean, from Cuba, from Africa. All people from all of these places are all along the border. And then climate change and ecological degradation has pushed people, because it's affected their livelihoods. So these crowds that you may see on the news, or you see in this picture, all up and down the border, these wonderful people, time and time again, they tell us they didn't intend to want to come to the United States. They didn't intend to seek asylum, but they felt like they had no other choice. So we've been trying to come alongside folks and minister to them. And as I said, Jorge Zapata is the coordinator of our group. Jorge is a lifelong resident of the border, with the exception of just a couple of short sojourns further up into Texas. He's lived on the Mexican side of the border when he was a child, and then later immigrated to the U.S. side and is naturalized citizen years ago, but knows the border, and is a long time minister, and has been with Cooperative Baptist Fellowship, CBF Texas, for a number of years, and knows pastors all up and down the border. And so when these congregations started receiving immigrants, he began to work with them and to find out about their needs. And so I remember the first time our program, or this ministry, got started. It got started with an email from Jorge about a church, and I'll tell you about that church in a minute, that had immigrants living under the or sleeping under the pews and on the pews and up by the pulpit, and everything was just escalating in cost. He said, "Can we help them?" And so that's how we kind of got started. And so I'll just kind of give you a tour from the Gulf of Mexico to the Pacific Ocean. This is Carlos Navarro. Royal Lane has been working with Iglesia Bautista West Brownsville. This your Christmas offering went to support them. And matter of fact, we have a picture, I think, of the foundation that got poured. This was a week ago, Friday. This was the 20th of March. And this is the backside of the church's property. They began as a immigrant respite center. In other words, this church, the main thing it does is that immigrants that are allowed to come into the United States, at that point, they've received a court date to have a final asylum hearing. And so they're allowed at that point into the U.S., but they have to go and stay with a sponsor until that court date. So people come across from Matamoros into Brownsville. They're headed to the bus station, but many of them have been living in a tent city in Matamoros in a pup tent for 3 months or more. And so the church has brought them in to let them have a shower, change of clothes, a hot meal, medicine, diapers, a really nice, pretty big packet, kind of a big goodie bag that can last a small family, mom, dad, couple of kids or so on a bus for maybe 48 hours to have water and snacks and that sort of thing, and get them on their way. And they share the love of Christ with them. And so the church has been doing this out of their facility. As you can imagine, the sheer volume, more than 4,000 people in a year coming through there, it's really taken its toll. and they have, you can't see it in this picture, but they've had just basically makeshift showers. Some of them's outdoors in a plyboard frame with a tarp in front of it for folks to be able to shower. And so what Pastor Carlos has wanted to do is to build a facility that would have women's and men's showers, small, kind of almost like bunk rooms in the facility, where if they have time, they could take a nap and get some rest. And then a nice eating area. And it would provide a better, safe, direct space for the immigrants. It also would help the church's regular building facilities to not be worn down so quickly. And so thanks to Royal Lane and some other folks over Christmas, I think we sent out a notice in maybe the 8th or 9th of December that we wanted to try to see if we couldn't build a small building. And then through Christmas and just about the first week in January, we received word that we had gone about $500 over our goal. So
Wow.
we've been through the process down on the border. It's just the same as it is in the Dallas area. The processes with the city and getting permits always goes slower than you wish it could. Pastor Carlos had hoped this building would be finished in April. It's probably we're not going to make it, but we got the permits and we got to pour the slab last week, and so we wired some more money to them this week, and I'm hoping that framing will go up next week. So this is Iglesia Bautista West Brownsville. They're just doing a wonderful job. Right now, not very many people are coming across the border because of the coronavirus epidemic and pandemic and the fears there. And so we're kind of shut down now with regard to that. So IB West Brownsville has then stepped up hauling supplies across that they're leaving for the tent city in Matamoros. They can't distribute them directly because of social distancing, but they're getting extra food and supplies over there. It's just a church that doesn't want to sit still. They just want to keep ministering, and so kind of that's where they're ministering, and they're ministering alongside one of their mission congregations, which is Iglesia Bautista Capernaum, and Rogelio Perez is the pastor there, and he's leading that ministry. This was a picture of Rogelio praying with some immigrants several months ago there in Matamoros. And this little church takes food across at least 2 days a week. They've been taking hot meals. They've been taking homemade tacos and homemade sandwiches over there on Tuesdays and Thursdays, as well as several wagons full of clothes and supplies and diapers and baby wipes. For the longest time, baby wipes was a way that parents cleaned their children completely. And so baby wipes and hand sanitizer have been really important. And Rogelio goes across and ministers to those people, members of his church. They cook the food in their own homes and then take it across. And right now they're social distancing as well because of the need. And so they're going across, and they're seeing their friends from a distance, and they're leaving the food on park benches so that the immigrants there can pick it up. And you probably wouldn't be surprised to know that it's just almost like a tent city. There are about 2,000, 2,500 people that live right across the bridge in Matamoros, and they sort of organize themselves. And obviously, IB West Brownsville, IB Capernaum, they're not the only ones that are providing ministry over there, but they're providing an important ongoing part of that. Also, they're trying to help the immigrants to fill out their asylum papers correctly, so they have at least a slim chance of getting to come into the States. And so it's an ongoing ministry. Talked to these pastors a couple days ago, and the fear of coronavirus now is in the tent cities and in the shelters because these folks have begun to hear about it. Wasn't broadcast a lot in Mexico for a while, but in the last week it really has. And they live in such tight, crowded conditions. If you don't pray for anything in a given day, just pray that the coronavirus will not invade this part of the border, because it could be pretty catastrophic.
So are they not? Is there a total shutdown as far as letting people through the border? Is it basically waiting several weeks until the peak of this hits?
Yeah, it's not an absolute total border closing. Uh, U.S. citizens can go across if they demonstrate they have a particular need. So, like the pastors going across taking supplies, uh, so far that has been accepted as a reason to cross. But they practice social distancing just like we do on the north side of the border when they get across. But so far, our pastors have been able to cross over, to take supplies over, sometimes to get closer. It depends on the locale. Matamoros, particularly because there's 22,000, 2,500 all there, it's the social distancing of Americans or of U.S. citizens from the immigrants is important because the immigrants are afraid that any people that cross would bring the virus across. So
Yeah.
the next person here is Lorenzo Ortiz, and Lorenzo's story is amazing. So a week ago, well, this is being recorded on the 27th on Friday. A week ago today, on the 20th of March, we learned that the border was going to be closed, but we didn't know how much. And Lorenzo lives in Laredo, but his ministry is in northern Mexico, primarily in Nuevo Laredo. And he was, as he is every day, he was on the Mexican side of the border ministering. And the border was to close at 11:59, and not knowing what was going to happen next, Lorenzo elected to stay on the Mexican side of the border because he felt his presence was needed more with the immigrants there than it's needed back home. I traded a lot of texts and emails with his daughter Ruth, and of course Ruth and his wife Aurelia were enormously scared, not only about the virus and everything, but that he could be stuck and not be able to come home. But he's been able to cross the border this week, but he still spends most of his time. Lorenzo is the first person we began helping. He's the one whose church, in little church in Laredo, was just literally filled with people who were coming across seeking asylum. They were allowed to stay across, and so the church started feeding them. Their utilities went up 300%. They didn't have a budget for food, and so Jorge told us about his friend Lorenzo, and so we told the story, and people gave money to Fellowship Southwest, and we passed it on to Lorenzo and his church. A little while later, that church kind of got tired of the strain of all of that and asked Lorenzo to quit feeding and sheltering the immigrants, and he and Aurelia thought about it, prayed about it, and said they couldn't stop. And so he lost his job as a pastor, and they then began feeding them out of their kitchen with some family and some friends that would come over and help them with cooking. In their little kitchen, they fed 1,000 people a month for 3 months, and people slept out in their yard. They put up some makeshift showers there in the back of their backyard. They have a pretty nice sized yard, but every inch of it was being used at the time there. Lorenzo's is a stonemason and so brick mason, and so he had a lot of space where he had for his supplies and stuff like that. So he just kind of piled that up to make room, and people just slept on the ground for a while. We helped to fund them. Then when everybody vanished in an instant, when the migrant protection protocols or stay in Mexico was kicked in, and so people had to go back into Mexico. So Lorenzo followed him back into Mexico, and now he operates in his new church that they founded, Iglesia Bautista El Buen Samaritano, Good Samaritan, began to minister over there. And so they operate now 3 shelters, 2 in Nuevo Laredo, right across the border, and another one further inland at Saltillo. And so Fellowship Southwest has been very involved in buying food and supplies there. Thanks to a donor, we were able to buy washers and dryers and tables and chairs. I hope were purchased actually this week for the 2 shelters in Nuevo Laredo. They were having, anywhere 60, 70 people living in basically a 2-bedroom house with a courtyard in the back, and they were just washing all their clothes in the sink and hanging them out on makeshift lines. So the quality of life there is going to improve some. But Lorenzo's just a courageous, compassionate pastor, and just love and admire him enormously.
That's great.
Yeah. up the border, and on the other side of the river, Primera Iglesia Bautista in Piedras Negras has been sheltering immigrants for quite a while as well. And that's Pastor Israel Rodriguez there on the left talking to Jorge when we were there a few months ago. The bunk beds you see in there were built by Second Baptist Church in Lubbock last summer and hauled up there so that folks could camp out. In two buildings that the church has. They have a downtown campus. It's the old church, and then they have a newer suburban campus. And so they have immigrants in both facilities. The Central Americans are in the downtown facility, and the South Americans and Cubans stay at the suburban campus. And they work out really well together. And of course, this ministry hasn't been impacted as directly because nobody's crossing the border right there. Israel lives in Mexico. The church is in Mexico, and we've been wiring funds to them for several months now, so we didn't have to figure out how to get the money or the supplies across. But they're continuing. Interesting thing Israel told us this week was that they've had some people who've received ministry of the church and decided to not seek asylum in America and seek visas to stay in Mexico, and have actually joined this church. So kind of a new standard for looking toward the future for some of the refugees. These border cities have a lot of factories along the border, and so in some of them, there are pretty decent job opportunities for some of the immigrants, and so some have been electing to stay right there. But in part, it's because this church is so loving and welcoming and nurturing that they just feel cared for. Further up the border, this is right on the edge of Texas in El Paso. Rosalia Sosa through Iglesia Bautista Tierra de Oro has been ministering in Juarez for quite a while. And Rosalio's church began, like the others, with ministry in their own facility back when the immigrants were allowed to cross. And then they began working south of the border when MPP went into effect. Rosalio's he's a natural networker and meets people and makes fast friends quickly, figures out great strategies for how to do things. And so they have been working with the state of Chihuahua. There's a person who works for the state government. His name is Enrique Valenzuela, and he's become really good friends with Rosalio. And Enrique's job is to, a part of his job is to manage the migrant flow through the state there. And so they have collaborated with Rosalio and his church network and the state and the city of Juarez to figure out best options for settling immigrants or caring for immigrants in the city and actually in the state. So I believe that their network operates about 18 shelters, most of them in Juarez. But wow. When we were out there not long ago, we drove 100 miles into the desert to this little tiny border town of Palomas, which has a string of immigrants coming through. These are folks that cross the desert to get there. And the town is small, the economy is suffering, and they couldn't afford to create a shelter. So we created an interesting collaborative. The city agreed to donate a building. I believe they had impounded it for taxes. The state of Chihuahua, with Enrique Valenzuela leading there, agreed to do renovations on the building. And then Rosalio asked us if we could help them to guarantee monthly funding for the food and supplies for the facility. And so we were able to do that. And since then, one of our foundation Friends Christian Mission Concerns based in Waco had given us some funds, set up a grant for it to help us. And they've agreed to help us to secure that funding for at least a year, probably longer, and also put a washer and dryer in that facility and a microwave in the last couple of weeks. But Rosalio has really been working all up and down the entire length of that state of Chihuahua. And the National Guard, the state employees, and the nonprofits there are doing some good work. And one interesting thing about a thing they put together is a way to provide education for children. So they have teachers who come into the shelters and try to help the kiddos that are living there to move forward in their education while their moms and dads are waiting to cross the border and seek asylum.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah, yeah. Now we're jumping all the way to California and to Baja California, to Tijuana, and that man there walking across the grounds is Juvenal Gonzalez. Juvenal is a church starting strategist, a church starter himself. He lives in Tijuana. His wife works for a hospital in Southern California, so she crosses the border to go to work regularly, and he stays there. They're both U.S. citizens, and so Juvenal was one of the first ones we began working with early on, because after the caravan that the first big caravan that came, many of the people were diverted to Tijuana, and so folks have been there for a long time, and they've had shelters across the city, and Juvenal has helped the group of, I think, about 20-25 small churches in Tijuana that he's helped the pastors of those churches get started in their ministries, and so they've provided the labor for providing meals in some of the camps. And so right now they're working in 2 shelters in Tijuana, feeding folks every day. And as sort of a sign of the times of what we're going through right now, the pastors of these bivocational pastors are at risk themselves. Many of their church members work in Southern California on tourist visas, actually, and they can't cross the border because they're Mexican citizens, and so they're unable to work. And some of them that work in Baja California there, and particularly in the factories, the work has slowed down because of the coronavirus. And so both their bivocational jobs and also their congregants' incomes have been curtailed. And so this week we actually wired some money out there to them, to the local association, to help to buy groceries that will actually feed the immigrants, but also help some of these pastors make it through too. And
Wow.
And so the situation is really pretty dire. And so the folks that have been the helpers now need some help as well. And so we feel blessed that we've been able to do this.
So tell me,
yeah.
Marv, what is it that people of faith, churches, as we are doing the hard work of isolating ourselves and trying to reserve funds and things like that to keep churches afloat, what are some tangible ways that we can assist Fellowship Southwest or those people working at the border?
Yeah, thanks. That's a great question. It sounds like a Sunday school answer, but the first thing is to pray. I talked to all of these pastors. We got on a conference call this week, and I asked them each to kind of give me an update, which I've just shared with you, of what's going on with them. And then before we got off the phone, I said, so what can we do for you? And the first answer, just about every time from all of them, was we need your prayers. That they are courageously afraid. They're afraid for their own sakes, and they're trying to be wise and judicious to do the right things in the right ways, and not to put others at risk, not to unwittingly bring the virus into their shelters or into the camps. And then also they ask prayers for these precious people. They feel a great burden for spiritual care and physical care for these folks, and so they ask for basically a hedge of protection there. Also, the needs seem to be escalating in the last a couple of 3 weeks because of, like I just explained, in Tijuana area. For those that can work in the congregations that are working, some of them are losing their jobs. The same thing is true in the Rio Grande Valley and along the border. Is some of these churches that are working, their members' jobs are being cut back or being lost because many of them are hourly workers and the economy's been impacted. And so the other part is support for our ongoing program of providing support for these pastors and their churches in this ministry. I sometimes feel a little awkward asking for money for our group, but all of it goes to support these people. And in the last few months, I've kind of thought a lot about that wonderful story of Elijah and the widow of Zarephath. And you may remember Elijah was coming along. He asked to stay at her home, and she was a widow. She had one child, and she said, well, I'm about to make our last meal, and then we're going to die. And he said, well, let me stay anyway. And she was going to cook up flour, use the oil, and make that meal. And she said yes to Elijah, yes to God. And the oil and the flour never ran out. And that's kind of the way our ministry sort of felt. We've never had tons and tons of money, but folks that have cared about these immigrants and admired these pastors and churches have sent us funds like you guys have done at Royal Lane, and we've been able to continue the ministry. And so we want to do that. And I pray that in time then we'll be able to come alongside them. And you mentioned the word, I think, tangible, in tangible ways of volunteers being able to go down there. I know you guys were planning on a mission trip this summer to Brownsville to work with these people, and we're all over. We're having to cancel those trips because we just we don't want to do the wrong thing in the wrong way, or do the right thing in the wrong way, I guess I should say. So I'm praying that that in time we'll be able to send volunteer groups down there to do some work, but also just as you well know, Mike, that just the physical presence of being with is so powerful. We all miss that right now, don't we? We're cooped up in our homes and everything. We miss on Sunday morning, in particular, gathering together and hearing each other and hugging each other and that sort of thing. And I think in an extended way, that's been true with this ministry on the border. So we're looking forward to a day when that will happen again too. And so when it does, I hope you guys will be able to come back and others will be able to do that. And I mean, selfishly for me, I say that you can enjoy or receive the joy that I've been able to receive by being present with these wonderful people, by hearing the stories of the immigrants, by just watching these pastors love on people and do hard work 7 days a week. And so we're hoping for that. I'm kind of over talking it because I get excited about it, but those are the things I think to keep in mind.
Well, thank you. As we move forward, I think prayer is going to be the way that we can help the most, and we will do that definitely. I know that Royal Lane is committed to not only continue to pay our employees, but to give to our missions organizations and nonprofits. And so we will continue to do that for as long as we have the resources. That's the most important thing. So thank you so much for your time. I know during this time of social isolation, we need to find ways to stay connected and to find out what's going on in the world. And so I hope as the pandemic progresses and eventually leaves us, that these conversations like the one I've had with you can provide much needed connection and helpful information for people who need that. Thank you so much, Marv, for your time today.
Thanks, Mike. And another thing I look forward to when this is all over is getting back to Royal Lane on a Sunday morning and worshiping with you guys and hearing your wonderful music and your great preaching, and hug some necks over there. I'll be looking forward to that.
All right. Well, that sounds great. It's so good to be with you, and look forward to many more conversations and our work to continue.
Me too. Thanks so much.
You bet.